In the heart of Waco, Texas, under the sticky summer sun, a young boy with a voice too big for his body stood before a trembling church crowd. The choir went silent. The piano stopped. And then he sang. That voice, clear, golden, soulful, filled the room like light through stained glass. Even grown men wiped their eyes. His name was Tony Thompson, and even at 10 years old, he sang like he'd already lived a lifetime of heartbreak. By 16, Tony would lead one of the hottest R&B groups of the 90 Seconds High Five. Their hit, I Like the Way, The Kissing Game, wasn't just a song. It was a generation's soundtrack. It played in roller rinks, on bedroom radios, at high school dances. Tony's voice defined young love. But the higher he climbed, the darker the shadows grew. Fame came fast. Money came slow. And behind the smiles on album covers were contracts, pressure, and the quiet war of addiction. By the time the lights faded, Tony's story would become one of the most heartbreaking in R&B history, a reminder that talent can take you to the stars, but pain can pull you right back down to earth. On a June night in 2007, back in the same Texas T, the boy who sang about love had lost the fight for his own life. This is the rise and fall of Tony Thompson, the voice that made the world feel young again, and the silence that followed. Before the gold records, before the flashing cameras, there was just a skinny boy from Waco, Texas, chasing sound. Tony Thompson wasn't born into fame, he was born into music. His earliest memories were hymns echoing through wooden church walls, the smell of Sunday dinners, and the clapping hands of a congregation that couldn't believe that kind of voice could come from someone so young. By the time Tony was 8 years old, his voice already carried the weight of a grown man's soul. He sang in the youth choir, belting notes that made older singers turn their heads. It wasn't long before people in town began whispering, "That boy's going to be a star." He didn't chase trouble, he chased microphones, talent shows, school events, local fairs. Everywhere there was a stage, Tony was on it, and every time, he won. But for Tony, it wasn't about trophies. It was about the feeling, that moment when a crowd gasped after he hit a note so clean, so perfect, it felt like a message from heaven. That's when he knew this was what he was born to do. At home, Tony dreamed big. He watched Michael Jackson on TV and studied every move, every breath, every note. He wanted to dance like him, sing like him, be like him, not for the fame, but because he saw in Michael a reflection of what was possible for a young black boy with a dream. One night, while performing at a small event in Waco, Tony met a local singer named William Walton, part of a group called Adore, the first R&B act from Waco to land a deal with Jive Records. Walton saw in Tony what everyone else saw: raw, unstoppable talent. He made a promise: "If I ever make it, I'll come back for you." And he did. Months later, Walton introduced Tony to two New York music managers, Vinnie Bell and Robert Ford, who were searching for the next teenage sensation, someone who could carry the soul of Michael Jackson with a fresh new edge. When Tony sang for them, the room froze. They didn't hear a kid. They heard a star. Within weeks, Tony was flying to New York, meeting producers, and recording demo tapes. For a boy who once sang in a Texas church, it felt like stepping into another universe. He brought along his friends Toriano Easley and Russell Neal, two other young singers with big voices and even bigger dreams. Together, they called themselves the Playmates. They were raw, hungry, and fearless. Soon, they caught the ear of Jive Records, the same label that would later sign legends like Britney Spears and NSYNC. But before any of that, High Five was Jive's first big bet on young R&B talent. Contracts were signed, stage clothes were bought, and Tony Thompson, the boy from Waco, was about to go from church solos to world tours. He didn't know it yet, but the price of that dream would be higher than he could ever imagine. The dream was no longer a dream, it was real. 5 teenage boys from small towns now stood under blinding stage lights, microphones in hand, hearts pounding as thousands screamed their names. High Five had arrived. Their debut single, I Just Can't Handle It, was a taste of what was to come: smooth harmonies, slick choreography, and Tony Thompson's voice shining like gold. But it was their next hit that changed everything. In the fall of 1990, I Like the Way, The Kissing Game, dropped, and the world stopped to listen. Produced by the legendary Teddy Riley, it wasn't just a song, it was an era in 3 minutes. Every school dance, every roller rink, Every mixtape that melody was everywhere. The single rocketed to Hasson on the Billboard Hot 100 and stayed there for weeks. It went platinum. Tony was just 16 years old, a kid from Waco now singing to millions. The group was touring the world, performing on TV, appearing in magazines. They wore street clothes one night, suits the next. They were cool, clean, and untouchable. But behind the cheers and camera flashes, reality was colder. They were still kids balancing fame with homework, cameras with tutors. While fans saw perfection, inside the group things were already starting to break. Just as their careers were taking off, tragedy struck. One of the founding members, Toriano Easley, was arrested for murder. What was supposed to be a bright chapter turned into a headline scandal. He claimed it was self-defense, but the image of High Five, the innocent teen R&B stars, was suddenly stained. Jive Records couldn't wait. They replaced him with Treston Irby, a 16-year-old gospel singer from New York whose audition silenced the room. With Treston on board, the machine kept rolling. Their next single, I Can't Wait Another Minute, hit #1 on the R&B charts and pushed them deeper into the mainstream. Even the soundtrack of Boys and the Hood featured their song Too Young, with a teenage prodigy from Mobb Deep dropping his first ever rap verse. High Five had become more than a boy band. They were the sound of the early 90 seconds. Money, fame, parties, it all came fast. Too fast. They were teenagers being treated like grown men, surrounded by industry sharks and bad advice. While the crowd screamed, the checks didn't match the fame. The label said they were in the red. The group wanted answers. That's when cracks turned into breaks. Member Russell Neal began demanding transparency. He wanted to know where the money was going. But when the others didn't back him up, he walked away. For him, the dream wasn't worth the deception. Still, High Five pressed on. In 1992, they released Keep It Going On, and their single, She's Playing Hard to Get, became another hit Hasson on Billboard, platinum status again. But success couldn't stop what was coming next. During a promotional tour in Florida, a car accident changed everything. Member Roderick Pooh Clark was thrown from their van and left paralyzed from the chest down. He would never walk again. That moment broke something in all of them. They were no longer just young stars. They were brothers grieving in slow motion, drowning the pain in alcohol and drugs. The music went on, but the joy behind it began to fade. Tony tried to stay strong. On stage, he was still electric, that smile, that voice, that energy. But offstage, the boy who once lifted souls in church was now carrying a cross too heavy for anyone that young. High Five had reached the top of the charts, but the fall had already begun. At first, the fall didn't look like a fall. It looked like success, the kind that made headlines and sold out arenas. But inside, High Five was cracking under the weight of everything they thought they wanted. By 1993, the group had it all. Hit records, platinum plaques, fame on both coasts. But fame is a strange thing. It gives you everything, and then quietly takes it back. Tony Thompson, once the shy kid from Waco, was now the face of teenage R&B. His voice had become the heart of every slow jam, every prom night memory. But behind the velvet tone and charming smile, Tony was exhausted from the endless travel, from the pressure, from pretending everything was okay. The group released their third and final album under Jive Records, Faithful. It had everything lush harmonies, grown-up lyrics, real soul. The single, Never Should Have Let You Go, even landed on the Sister Act 2 soundtrack. But the label didn't push the record. Promotion was half-hearted, money was tight, and the group's chemistry had faded. Still, Tony carried on. He had always been the glue, the one who smiled for the cameras, who sang through the heartbreak. But when Jive Records approached with a new deal, a solo contract, the pressure on him doubled. For years, labels had whispered in his ear, "You don't need them, Tony. You're the star." And maybe he believed it. By 1995, High Five had left Jive and signed with Giant Records. The plan was simple. Tony would release his solo debut, Sexational, and then the group would follow with a new album. It sounded fair. It sounded smart. But it wasn't. Giant Records didn't care about the group, they wanted Tony. He was their next big R&B bet, their potential new Usher. They poured money into his solo project, hiring top-tier producers Teddy Riley, Babyface, Al B. Sure, even Puff Daddy and Missy Elliott worked on tracks. The album was good too, good to fail. But it did. When Sexational dropped, It barely made a dent on the charts. The single "I Wanna Love Like That" reached the top 20, but sales didn't follow. Giant Records pulled the plug, dropping Tony and High Five altogether. The dream had turned cold. The fall hit Tony hardest. He'd been groomed for stardom, told his voice would carry him forever. But when the spotlight dimmed, the silence was unbearable. He turned to what so many broken stars turn to: drugs. Cocaine, heroin, anything to numb the noise. Old bandmates tried to help. Rehab was suggested. Promises were made. But addiction doesn't care about gold records. It doesn't care about legacy. It just takes. Meanwhile, the rest of High Five scattered. Some took regular jobs. Some stayed in music. Others, like Russell Neal, drifted into darker paths. The brotherhood that once made them unstoppable had turned into a painful memory. Tony tried one more time. He signed briefly with Bad Boy Records, hoping Puff Daddy could revive his career. But his habits and his heartbreak followed him. The deal collapsed before it even began. By the early 2000s, Tony was living back in Waco, far from the lights, far from the fans who once screamed his name. The boy who sang about love was now singing only to himself. But deep down, Tony never stopped dreaming. He started his own label, In-Depth Records, and even planned a new High Five reunion. He believed, against all odds, that he could come back, that his voice could rise again. But sometimes, life doesn't give second chances. Tony Thompson's story was no longer about fame. It was about survival, a fight between the voice that made him famous and the silence that haunted him. The fall was complete. But tragedy hadn't finished with him yet. By 2007, Tony Thompson was no longer the teenage superstar who had made the world fall in love with the kissing game. He was 31 years old, older, quieter, and tired from years of fighting his own demons. The spotlight that once chased him had faded. But deep inside, Tony was still chasing one last dream, a comeback. He had formed a new label, In-Depth Records, and assembled a brand new version of High Five. He said he wanted to bring back that real R&B sound, the harmonies, the heart, the soul that had defined his youth. In interviews, his voice still carried a spark. "I've been through things," he said, "but the music never left me. It's still here." He released a project titled The Return in 2005, featuring collaborations with Houston rap icons like Bun B, Paul Wall, and Mike Jones. But instead of celebration, controversy followed. The original High Five members filed a cease and desist order, claiming rights to the group's name. The public feud spilled onto radio shows, even Wendy Williams, where Tony and former bandmate Treston Irby argued on air. The man who once sang about love was now fighting just to be heard. Behind the scenes, Tony was struggling. The drugs were still there, the old ghosts that never really left. Friends said he wanted to quit, that he was trying to get clean, that he still dreamed about one more shot at music. But pain, fame, and addiction are a cruel mix. Then, on the 1st of June 2007, the music stopped. Around 10 p.m. that night, security guards at an apartment complex in Waco, Texas, Tony's hometown, discovered his body near the air conditioning units behind the building. The scene was silent, the night heavy with summer heat. Tony Thompson was gone. He had been huffing Freon, a dangerous chemical found in air conditioners, a desperate act used by some addicts to get high. The coroner's report found no other drugs or alcohol, only traces of methadone, a medicine meant to help people fight heroin addiction. That detail broke everyone's heart. He had been trying. He was fighting to stay clean, to start over. He died alone, just a few miles from where his story had begun, the same boy who once sang in church choirs, who made millions of people smile with a single note. When the news broke, fans didn't believe it. How could someone with that much light vanish so quietly? Former bandmates like Marcus Sanders and Treston Irby were devastated. They had just reconnected with Tony, talking about reuniting, recording again, healing old wounds. They said he sounded hopeful, ready, but hope can be fragile. After Tony's death, High Five seemed cursed. In 2014, former member Russell Neal was charged with murdering his wife, later found incompetent to stand trial after claiming to be Jesus Christ. Another member, Pooh Clark, passed away from pneumonia after years of living paralyzed from his tragic car accident. Even Treston Irby was shot multiple times outside a nightclub in 2009, though he miraculously survived. It felt like the world had turned its back on one of R&B's brightest lights. And yet, Tony Thompson's voice still lives. You can hear it every time The Kissing Game plays on the radio, or when a 90 seconds playlist brings you back to a simpler time, a time when 5 young boys made the world believe in love songs again. Tony's story is more than a tragedy. It's a reminder of how fragile brilliance can be, how fame can lift you to heaven and drop you just as fast. He was only 31 years old, but his voice, his energy, his legacy, those remain timeless. He sang about love, he dreamed about forever, and in a way, he got it because Tony Thompson's music never truly died. Rest in peace, Tony Thompson. The voice of High Five will never fade. Some stories don't end, they just fade into the kind of silence that hums between radio stations. Tony Thompson's is one of those stories. He was more than a singer. He was a sound smooth, pure, and drenched in innocence. When he sang, "I Like the Way," the kissing game, he didn't just hit notes, he hit memories. For every kid slow dancing at a middle school party, for every dreamer who believed music could heal, Tony was there. But fame is a fragile home. It gives you lights, applause, and love then asks you to pay with your soul. Tony paid too much. Addiction tried to silence him, but even in his darkest moments, the world could still hear that voice echoing through time. Today, when fans press play on a High Five song, they don't just remember a group, they remember a generation. They remember what it felt like to fall in love for the first time. They remember a young man from Waco, Texas, who carried the hopes of 5 friends on his shoulders and sang them into history. Tony Thompson didn't get the ending he deserved, but he left behind a melody that refuses to die. Somewhere in the airwaves, his voice still floats soft, eternal, untouchable. And maybe that's what real legacy sounds like. Rest easy, Tony. The world still likes the way you make us feel.